The sun was shining brightly on what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. The church was filled with friends and family, the flowers were perfectly arranged, and the air was thick with anticipation. He stood at the altar, his heart pounding, his hands slightly trembling as he adjusted his tie. He couldn't believe this day had finally arrived. He had dreamed of this moment for years, and now it was here. But as the minutes ticked by, the excitement began to turn into unease. The music hadn't started, and the guests were beginning to whisper. Where was she? The groom glanced at the priest, who gave him a reassuring smile, but even the priest's calm demeanor couldn't ease the growing tension. The groom's best man leaned over and whispered, "Maybe she's just running late. Traffic or something." But deep down, he knew something was wrong. She was never late, especially not for something as important as this. Then, the door at the back of the church creaked open, and everyone turned to look. But it wasn't her. It was her younger sister, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. She walked slowly down the aisle, clutching a piece of paper in her hand. The groom's heart sank as she approached. He could see the tears streaming down her face, and he knew before she even spoke that something terrible had happened. "She's gone," the sister said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She left this for you." She handed him the letter and then turned and ran out of the church, leaving everyone in stunned silence. The groom stood there, frozen, the letter in his hand. He couldn't move, couldn't think. All he could do was stare at the envelope with his name written on it in her familiar handwriting. The guests were murmuring now, some of them getting up to leave, others sitting in shocked silence. The best man put a hand on his shoulder, but he barely felt it. His world had just been turned upside down, and he didn't know what to do. Finally, he opened the letter. His hands were shaking so badly that he could barely unfold the paper. As he read the words, his heart broke all over again. She explained everything in the letter, why she couldn't go through with the wedding, why she had to leave, and how sorry she was. She told him that she loved him but that she couldn't be the person he needed her to be. She said she hoped he could forgive her one day and that she would always cherish the time they had together. The groom read the letter over and over, each word cutting deeper than the last. He couldn't believe this was happening. How could she do this to him? How could she leave him at the altar, in front of all their friends and family, without even saying goodbye? He felt anger, sadness, and confusion all at once, but most of all, he felt lost. He didn't know what to do next. The guests had all left by now, and the church was empty except for him and his best man. The best man tried to comfort him, but there was nothing anyone could say to make this better. The groom just sat there, staring at the letter, trying to make sense of it all. He had planned his whole future around her, and now she was gone. He didn't know how to move forward. Days turned into weeks, and the groom tried to pick up the pieces of his life. He went back to work, tried to act normal, but everything felt empty. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about the letter, about what could have been. He replayed their relationship in his mind, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong. Had he missed the signs? Had she been unhappy all along? He didn't know, and he couldn't stop blaming himself. Then, one day, he got a call from her sister. She wanted to meet him, to explain things in person. He wasn't sure if he was ready to see her, but he knew he needed answers. They met at a small cafe, and as soon as he saw her, he could tell she was nervous. She apologized for what had happened and told him that her sister had been struggling with something for a long time, something she hadn't been able to share with anyone, not even him. The groom listened as the sister explained everything. She told him about the struggles her sister had been facing, the doubts and fears that had been eating away at her. She said that her sister had loved him deeply but that she had been too scared to face her own demons, too scared to drag him into her pain. She had thought that leaving was the only way to protect him, to give him a chance at a happy life without her. As he listened, the groom felt a mix of emotions. He was still hurt, still angry, but he also felt a sense of understanding. He realized that she had been suffering in silence, and he wished she had trusted him enough to let him help her. He wished she had given him the chance to stand by her side, no matter what. But he also knew that he couldn't change the past. All he could do was try to move forward. The sister handed him another letter, this one from her sister. She said that she had written it after she left, but she hadn't been able to send it. The groom took the letter and read it slowly. In it, she apologized again and told him how much she missed him. She said that she had made a mistake, that she should have stayed and fought for their love instead of running away. She said that she hoped he could find it in his heart to forgive her one day. The groom folded the letter and put it in his pocket. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that he couldn't keep living in the past. He had to find a way to move on, to heal, and to find happiness again. It wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to try. As he left the cafe, he felt a sense of closure that he hadn't felt before. He still loved her, and he probably always would, but he knew that he couldn't let her decision define the rest of his life. He had to find a way to live for himself, to create a new future, one that didn't include her. And maybe, just maybe, he would find love again someday. But for now, he was going to take it one day at a time. The days after the meeting with her sister were a blur. The groom found himself caught in a whirlwind of emotions, grief, anger, confusion, and even a strange sense of relief. The second letter she had left him was tucked safely in his drawer, but he couldn't bring himself to read it again. It felt like reopening a wound that was just starting to scab over. Instead, he focused on the mundane tasks of daily life, hoping they would distract him from the ache in his chest. Work became his refuge. He threw himself into projects, staying late at the office and volunteering for tasks that no one else wanted. His colleagues noticed the change in him, the quiet intensity, the way he seemed to be running from something, but no one dared to ask. They had all heard about the wedding, about how she had left him at the altar, and they didn't want to pry. He was grateful for their silence. He wasn't ready to talk about it, not yet. But no matter how busy he kept himself, the thoughts always crept back in. He would find himself staring at his computer screen, his mind wandering to the past. He thought about the first time they met, how her laughter had filled the room and how her eyes had sparkled when she smiled. He thought about the nights they had spent talking for hours, about their dreams and fears and everything in between. He thought about the way she had looked at him when she said yes to his proposal, her face glowing with happiness. And then he thought about the letter, about the words that had shattered his world. One evening, after another long day at work, he found himself standing in front of her old apartment. He hadn't planned to go there, he didn't even remember making the decision, but there he was, staring up at the window of the place they had once shared. The lights were off, and the curtains were drawn. He wondered if she had come back, if she was still living there, or if she had moved on to somewhere new. He didn't know, and he wasn't sure he wanted to. As he stood there, a memory surfaced, one he hadn't thought about in years. It was from early in their relationship, when they were still figuring each other out. They had been arguing about something trivial, he couldn't even remember what it was, and she had stormed out of the apartment, saying she needed space. He had let her go, assuming she would come back when she was ready. But hours passed, and she didn't return. He had started to worry, imagining all sorts of terrible scenarios, and he had finally gone out to look for her. He found her sitting on a bench in the park, her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the stars. She hadn't noticed him at first, and he had stood there for a moment, watching her. She looked so small, so vulnerable, and it had struck him then how much she carried on her shoulders. When she finally saw him, she had burst into tears, and he had held her as she cried. She had apologized for running away, and he had told her that it was okay, that he would always come after her, no matter what. The memory hit him like a punch to the gut. He had promised her that he would always come after her, but this time, he hadn't. This time, she had run away, and he had let her go. He hadn't even tried to find her. The realization filled him with guilt. Had he failed her? Had he not fought hard enough for their love? He didn't know, but the questions haunted him. The next day, he decided to do something he had been avoiding for weeks. He went to see her parents. They had always been kind to him, treating him like a son, and he knew they would have answers. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, exactly, but he needed to understand. He needed to know why she had left, why she hadn't trusted him enough to stay. Her parents welcomed him with open arms, but he could see the sadness in their eyes. They had loved him too, and they had been devastated by what had happened. They invited him in, and they sat together in the living room, the air heavy with unspoken words. Finally, he asked the question that had been burning in his mind. Why did she leave? Her mother sighed, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. She was scared, she said softly. She was scared of so many things, of failing you, of failing herself, of not being enough. She's always been like that, ever since she was a little girl. She puts so much pressure on herself, and she doesn't know how to let anyone in, not really. Her father nodded, his expression grim. We tried to talk to her, to tell her that she was making a mistake, but she wouldn't listen. She thought she was doing the right thing, that she was protecting you. She didn't want to drag you down with her. The groom listened, his heart breaking all over again. He had known that she struggled with self-doubt, but he had never realized how deep it went. He had always seen her as strong, as someone who could handle anything life threw at her. But now he saw the truth, she had been fighting a battle he hadn't even known about. Where is she now? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Her parents exchanged a glance, and he could see the hesitation in their eyes. Finally, her mother spoke. She's staying with a friend, in another city. She needed some time to figure things out, to work on herself. She's been seeing a therapist, trying to understand why she does the things she does. The groom nodded, feeling a mix of emotions. He was glad that she was getting help, but he also felt a pang of sadness. She had needed him, and he hadn't been there. He had been so focused on his own pain that he hadn't stopped to think about hers. As he left her parents' house, he made a decision. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that he couldn't let things end like this. He needed to see her, to talk to her, to tell her that he still loved her and that he was willing to fight for their relationship. He didn't know if she would want to see him, if she would be ready to face him, but he had to try. He went home and packed a bag, his mind racing with thoughts of what he would say to her. He didn't know if she would forgive him for not coming after her sooner, but he hoped that she would understand. He hoped that she would see how much he cared, how much he was willing to do to make things right. The next morning, he set off on the long drive to the city where she was staying. The road stretched out before him, endless and uncertain, but he didn't care. He was finally taking control of his life, finally fighting for what he wanted. And no matter what happened, he knew that he would never regret trying. As he drove, he thought about the letter, about the words she had written. He thought about the love they had shared, the dreams they had built together. And he thought about the future, about the possibility of starting over. He didn't know what would happen when he saw her, but he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't going to let her go without a fight. The drive felt endless. Mile after mile, the groom's mind raced with thoughts of what he would say, how he would say it, and whether she would even want to hear it. The city where she was staying was unfamiliar to him, and as he navigated the busy streets, he felt a growing sense of unease. What if she refused to see him? What if she had already moved on? He pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the hope that had brought him here in the first place. He arrived at the address her parents had given him, a small, quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The house was modest, with a well-kept garden and a sense of calm that felt almost surreal compared to the storm raging inside him. He parked his car and sat there for a moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady his nerves. This was it. There was no turning back now. As he walked up to the door, he noticed a familiar figure sitting on the porch. It was her best friend, the one she had been staying with. She looked up as he approached, her expression a mix of surprise and concern. She stood, brushing off her jeans, and met him halfway. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," she said quietly, her voice tinged with sadness. "I had to," he replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I need to see her. I need to talk to her." Her friend hesitated, glancing back at the house. She's not doing great. She's been struggling a lot since everything happened. I don't know if she's ready to see you." "I understand," he said, his heart sinking. "But I need to try. Please." Her friend studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Okay. I'll go talk to her. Wait here." He watched as she disappeared into the house, leaving him alone on the porch. The minutes felt like hours as he waited, his mind racing with possibilities. Would she come out? Would she even want to see him? He didn't know, but he clung to the hope that she would. Finally, the door opened, and she stepped out. She looked different, thinner, paler, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. But she was still the woman he had fallen in love with. His heart ached at the sight of her, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. "Hi," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hi," he replied, his voice cracking. He took a step closer, but she didn't move. There was a distance between them now, one that hadn't been there before, and it hurt more than he could have imagined. I didn't expect to see you," she said, her eyes darting to the ground. I thought you'd hate me." "I could never hate you," he said, his voice firm. "I was hurt and confused, but I could never hate you." She looked up at him then, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know what else to do." "I know," he said, his own eyes filling with tears. "I know you were scared. I know you were trying to protect me. But I wish you had talked to me. I wish you had let me in." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I wanted to so badly. But I was so scared that I would ruin everything, that I would ruin you. I thought it would be better if I just left." He took another step closer, closing the distance between them. "It wasn't better," he said softly. "It wasn't better for me, and it wasn't better for you. We're supposed to face things together, remember? That's what we promised each other." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his. "Do you really believe that? Even after everything?" "I do," he said without hesitation. "I love you. I've always loved you. And I'm not giving up on us, not without a fight." For a moment, she just stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. Her touch was tentative, almost hesitant, but it was enough to send a wave of relief through him. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I'm scared that I'll mess things up again, that I'll hurt you again." "I'm scared too," he said, squeezing her hand. "But we can't let fear control us. We have to trust each other. We have to try." She nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "I want to try," she said softly. "I want to try so badly." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her tightly as she cried. It felt like coming home, like finding a piece of himself that had been missing. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that they would face it together. They sat on the porch for hours, talking about everything that had happened. She told him about the therapy she had been going to, about the things she had learned about herself. She told him about the guilt she had been carrying, the fear that had driven her to leave. And he told her about his own struggles, about the pain and confusion he had felt after she left. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, moments when old wounds threatened to reopen. But they talked through it, slowly and carefully, rebuilding the trust that had been broken. By the time the sun began to set, they were both exhausted, but there was a sense of hope that hadn't been there before. As they sat there, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink, she turned to him and smiled, a small, tentative smile, but a smile nonetheless. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "I'll never give up on you," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "No matter what happens, I'll always be here for you." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and for the first time in months, he felt a sense of peace. They still had a long way to go, but they were taking the first steps together. And that was enough. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, he knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and fear, but they would face them together. They had been given a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. For the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. And as he held her hand, he knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. The days that followed their reunion were a mix of healing and uncertainty. They spent hours talking, unraveling the layers of pain and misunderstanding that had driven them apart. It wasn't easy, there were moments of tension, moments when old wounds threatened to reopen, but they were committed to making it work. For the first time in months, they felt like they were on the same page, like they were finally moving forward together. She stayed with her friend for a few more days, but they both knew it was only a matter of time before she came home. Home. The word felt strange now, loaded with meaning. Their apartment had been empty since she left, a shell of what it once was. But as they talked about the future, they began to rebuild the idea of what home could be, not just a place, but a feeling, a promise to always come back to each other. One evening, as they sat on the porch of her friend's house, she turned to him and said, "I think I'm ready to come back. If you'll have me." He looked at her, his heart swelling with emotion. "Of course I'll have you," he said, his voice steady. "You're my home. You always have been." The next day, they packed up her things and made the drive back to their city. The journey was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that comes when two people are at peace with each other. When they arrived at their apartment, she hesitated at the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the key. "It's okay," he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We'll take it one step at a time." She nodded, took a deep breath, and unlocked the door. The apartment was exactly as she had left it, but it felt different now, lighter, somehow, as if the weight of their past had been lifted. They spent the rest of the day unpacking and settling back in, slowly reclaiming the space as their own. That night, as they sat on the couch together, she turned to him and said, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About why I left. And I realized something." "What's that?" he asked, his heart skipping a beat. "I realized that I was so focused on my own fears, my own insecurities, that I didn't stop to think about how much I was hurting you. I was so scared of failing you that I ended up doing the very thing I was trying to avoid. And I'm so sorry for that." He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I've been thinking about it too," he said. "And I realized that I wasn't there for you the way I should have been. I didn't see how much you were struggling, and I didn't do enough to support you. I'm sorry too." She looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to keep apologizing," she said softly. "I just want to move forward. I want to be better, for you, for us. We'll be better together," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "We'll learn from this, and we'll grow. That's all we can do." Over the next few weeks, they fell into a new rhythm. They started couples therapy, something they had both been hesitant about but knew was necessary. It wasn't easy, there were moments of frustration, moments when old habits threatened to resurface, but they were committed to the process. They learned to communicate better, to listen to each other without judgment, to be honest about their fears and insecurities. They also made an effort to reconnect in small, meaningful ways. They started cooking meals together again, something they had always loved but had let fall by the wayside in the chaos of their lives. They took long walks in the evenings, talking about their days and their dreams. They even started a new tradition. Every Sunday, they would write each other a letter, sharing their thoughts and feelings in a way that felt more intimate and vulnerable than spoken words. One Sunday, as they sat at the kitchen table writing their letters, she looked up at him and smiled. "Do you remember the first letter you ever wrote me?" she asked. He laughed, a warm, genuine sound that filled the room. "How could I forget? It was terrible. I think I used the word awesome about 10 times. She grinned. "It was perfect. Because it was from you." He reached across the table and took her hand, his expression serious. "I meant every word," he said. "And I still do. You're my everything." Tears filled her eyes, but this time, they were tears of joy. "You're my everything too," she said softly. "And I'm so grateful for this second chance." As the weeks turned into months, they began to feel like themselves again, not the same as before, but stronger, more resilient. They had been through something unimaginable, but they had come out the other side together. And that was what mattered. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, she turned to him and said, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" he asked, his arm draped around her shoulders. I think I want to try again," she said, her voice tentative but hopeful. "Not right away, but someday. I think I want to get married." He looked at her, his heart swelling with emotion. "I'd like that," he said softly. "But only when you're ready. There's no rush." She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "I know. But I just wanted you to know that I'm not giving up on us. Not ever." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Neither am I," he said. "We're in this together, no matter what." As they sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, they felt a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. They had been through hell and back, but they had come out stronger on the other side. And as they looked toward the future, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because that's what love was, not just the happy moments, but the hard ones too. It was about showing up, even when it was difficult. It was about choosing each other, every single day. And that was exactly what they planned to do. Life began to settle into a new normal for them. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer felt like open wounds. Instead, they served as reminders of how far they had come and how much they had grown. Their relationship felt different now, deeper, more intentional. They were no longer taking each other for granted. Every moment together felt like a gift, and they were determined to make the most of it. One Saturday morning, they decided to revisit a place that held special meaning for them, the park where they had shared so many memories. It was where they had gone on their first date, where they had celebrated anniversaries, and where they had often gone to escape the chaos of life. As they walked hand in hand along the familiar paths, they couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" she asked, a small smile playing on her lips. He chuckled. "How could I forget? You were so nervous, you spilled your coffee all over yourself." She groaned, covering her face with her hands. "Don't remind me. I was so embarrassed." "But you know what?" he said, squeezing her hand. "That's when I knew I was falling for you. You were so real. You weren't trying to impress me or be someone you weren't. You were just you." She looked up at him, her eyes soft. "I think that's when I started falling for you too. You didn't make me feel like I had to be perfect. You just accepted me." They stopped at a bench overlooking the lake, the same bench where they had sat so many times before. The water was calm, reflecting the clear blue sky above. It was a peaceful moment, one that felt like a metaphor for where they were in their relationship, calm, steady, and full of promise. As they sat there, she turned to him and said, "I've been thinking a lot about the future. About us." "Me too," he admitted. "What's on your mind?" She took a deep breath, her expression thoughtful. "I know we've talked about trying again someday, about getting married. And I still want that. But I also think we need to make sure we're ready. I don't want to rush into anything. I want to do it right this time." He nodded, his heart swelling with pride at how far she had come. "I agree. We've worked so hard to get to this point, and I don't want to risk losing it. We'll take our time, and we'll do it when it feels right." She smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I love how patient you are with me. I don't think I've ever told you that, but it means so much." He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "I love you. And that means loving all of you, the good, the bad, and everything in between. I'm not going anywhere." They sat there for a while, watching the ducks glide across the water and the leaves rustle in the breeze. It was a simple moment, but it felt profound. They were building a new foundation, one based on honesty, trust, and a deep understanding of each other. Over the next few months, they continued to work on themselves and their relationship. They kept up with therapy, both individually and as a couple, and they made a conscious effort to prioritize each other. They celebrated small victories, like the first time she opened up about her fears without shutting down, or the first time he admitted he was struggling without trying to tough it out. These moments felt like milestones, proof that they were moving in the right direction. One evening, as they were cooking dinner together, she turned to him and said, "I have an idea." "Oh no," he teased, grinning. "Should I be worried?" She laughed, swatting him playfully with a dish towel. "Very funny." "No, I was thinking, what if we took a trip? Just the two of us. Somewhere we've never been before. A fresh start, in a way." He considered this, his expression thoughtful. "I like that idea. Where were you thinking?" She shrugged. "I don't know. Somewhere quiet, maybe by the ocean. Somewhere we can just be." He nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "Let's do it. Let's plan a trip." They spent the next few weeks researching and planning, finally settling on a small coastal town a few hours away. It was the perfect place, quiet, secluded, and full of natural beauty. When the day of the trip finally arrived, they were both filled with a sense of excitement and anticipation. The drive was peaceful, the kind of road trip where you lose track of time and just enjoy the journey. When they arrived at the town, they were greeted by the sound of waves crashing against the shore and the salty tang of the ocean air. They checked into a cozy little inn and spent the rest of the day exploring, walking along the beach and soaking in the beauty of their surroundings. That night, as they sat on the porch of their inn, watching the sun set over the water, she turned to him and said, "This feels like a new beginning." He nodded, his heart full. "It does. And I'm so glad we're here together." She reached for his hand, her expression serious. "I want you to know something. No matter what happens, no matter where life takes us, I'll always be grateful for you. For your patience, your kindness, your love. You've shown me what it means to truly be loved, and I'll never forget that." He looked at her, his eyes filled with emotion. "You've shown me the same thing. You've taught me so much about love and forgiveness and resilience. I'm so proud of you, of us." They sat there for a long time, watching the stars come out one by one. It was a moment of pure contentment, a reminder of how far they had come and how much they had overcome. They had been through hell and back, but they had come out stronger on the other side. As they headed back to their room that night, hand in hand, they knew that this was just the beginning. They had a long road ahead of them, but they were ready to face it together. They had learned the hard way that love wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. And as they drifted off to sleep that night, they did so with a sense of peace and hope for the future. Because no matter what challenges lay ahead, they knew one thing for certain: they were in this together. And that was all that mattered. The coastal town became their sanctuary, a place where they could breathe freely and let go of the weight they had been carrying. The days there were slow and unhurried, filled with long walks on the beach, lazy afternoons spent reading under the shade of an umbrella, and quiet evenings watching the sun dip below the horizon. It was a stark contrast to the chaos they had left behind, and it gave them the space they needed to reconnect on a deeper level. One morning, as they sat on the sand, watching the waves roll in, she turned to him and said, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" he asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I think I want to start writing again," she said, her voice tentative but hopeful. "It's something I used to love, but I stopped because I didn't think I was good enough. But being here, feeling this peace, it's made me realize how much I miss it." He smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "That's amazing. You've always had such a way with words. I think you should go for it." She looked at him, her eyes searching his. "You really think so?" "I know so," he said firmly. "And I'll support you every step of the way." Her face lit up, and for the first time in a long time, he saw a spark of the old her, the passionate, creative person she had been before life had weighed her down. It was a reminder of how much she had grown, how far she had come, and it filled him with hope for their future. That afternoon, they went into town and bought a notebook and a set of pens. She spent the rest of the day writing, her face a picture of concentration as she filled the pages with her thoughts and ideas. He watched her from a distance, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. This was her reclaiming a part of herself, and it was beautiful to witness. As the days passed, they fell into a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. They spent their mornings exploring the town, their afternoons relaxing by the water, and their evenings talking about everything and nothing. It was a time of healing, of rediscovery, and of building a stronger foundation for their relationship. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their inn, she turned to him and said, "I've been thinking about something else." "You've been doing a lot of thinking," he teased, grinning. She laughed, swatting him playfully. "I have. But this is important." "Okay, I'm listening," he said, his expression serious. She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his. I think I'm ready. To try again. To get married." He stared at her, his heart skipping a beat. "Are you sure?" She nodded, her expression filled with determination. "I'm sure. I've done a lot of work on myself, and I know I'm not the same person I was when I left. I'm stronger now, and I'm ready to take that step with you. But only if you're ready too." He reached for her hand, his eyes filled with emotion. "I've been ready for a long time. I've always known that you're the one I want to spend my life with. But I wanted to make sure you were ready, that you were doing it for the right reasons." "I am," she said firmly. "I'm doing it because I love you, and because I want to build a life with you. A real, honest, beautiful life." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "Then let's do it," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "Let's get married." They spent the rest of the evening talking about their plans, their dreams, and their hopes for the future. It felt different this time, more grounded, more intentional. They weren't rushing into anything, they were making a conscious decision to move forward together, with their eyes wide open. The next morning, they woke up with a sense of purpose. They spent the day exploring the town, looking for the perfect spot to have a small, intimate ceremony. They found it on a secluded stretch of beach, where the sand was soft and the waves crashed against the shore in a soothing rhythm. It was peaceful, beautiful, and exactly what they wanted. They decided to keep it simple, just the two of them, a local officiant, and the ocean as their witness. They didn't need anything extravagant, all they needed was each other. The day of the ceremony was perfect. The sun was shining, the sky was clear, and the air was filled with the sound of the waves and the cries of seagulls. She wore a simple white dress, and he wore a light linen shirt and trousers. They stood barefoot in the sand, holding hands as the officiant spoke about love, commitment, and the journey they had been on. When it came time to exchange vows, she went first. "I promise to love you, to support you, and to stand by your side no matter what life throws our way. I promise to be honest with you, to communicate openly, and to never let fear come between us again. You've shown me what it means to truly love and be loved, and I'm so grateful to have you in my life." He took a deep breath, his eyes filled with tears. "I promise to love you, to cherish you, and to always fight for us. I promise to be your partner, your confidant, and your biggest supporter. You've taught me so much about resilience and forgiveness, and I'm so proud to call you mine." They exchanged rings, simple bands that symbolized their commitment to each other. And then, with the ocean as their witness, they sealed their vows with a kiss. It was a moment of pure joy, a celebration of everything they had overcome and everything they had built together. They had been through hell and back, but they had come out stronger on the other side. And as they stood there, hand in hand, they knew that this was just the beginning. The rest of the day was a blur of laughter, tears, and quiet moments of reflection. They spent the evening watching the sunset, their hearts full and their spirits light. They had taken a huge step forward, and they were ready to face whatever came next. As they drifted off to sleep that night, wrapped in each other's arms, they felt a sense of peace and contentment that they hadn't felt in a long time. They had been given a second chance, and they were determined to make the most of it. Because no matter what challenges lay ahead, they knew one thing for certain: they were in this together. And that was all that mattered. The days following their intimate beach ceremony were filled with a quiet, unshakable joy. They spent their time exploring the coastal town, savoring the simplicity of their new life together. The weight of the past seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of hope and possibility. They were no longer just surviving, they were thriving, building a future rooted in love, trust, and mutual understanding. One morning, as they sat on the porch of their inn, sipping coffee and watching the waves, she turned to him and said, "I've been thinking about what's next for us." "What do you mean?" he asked, setting his cup down. "I mean, we've come so far, and I'm so grateful for everything we've built. But I don't want us to stop here. I want us to keep growing, keep challenging ourselves. I want us to dream big." He smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "I love that. What kind of dreams are we talking about?" She hesitated for a moment, then said, "I've been thinking about starting my own business. Something small, maybe a little cafe or bookstore. I've always loved the idea of creating a space where people can come together, feel welcome, and connect." His eyes lit up. "That's an amazing idea. You'd be incredible at it. You have such a gift for making people feel at home." She blushed, looking down at her hands. "I don't know, it's just an idea. But it's something I've always wanted to do." "Then let's make it happen," he said firmly. "We'll figure it out together. I'll support you every step of the way." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You always do. And that means more to me than I can say." They spent the rest of the morning brainstorming ideas, sketching out plans, and dreaming about what their future could look like. It was exciting, but it was also a little scary. Starting a business was a big step, and they knew it would come with its own set of challenges. But they were ready to face them together. When they returned home a few days later, they threw themselves into making their dream a reality. They spent hours researching, meeting with advisors, and visiting potential locations. It was a lot of work, but it was also incredibly rewarding. They were building something together, something that was entirely their own. One evening, as they sat at their kitchen table surrounded by spreadsheets and sketches, she turned to him and said, "I can't believe we're actually doing this." He smiled, reaching for her hand. "I can. You've always been capable of amazing things. I'm just glad I get to be a part of it." She squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with emotion. "I couldn't do this without you. You've always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." "That's what partners do," he said simply. "We lift each other up." As the weeks turned into months, their dream began to take shape. They found the perfect location, a cozy little space in the heart of their neighborhood, and began the process of renovating it. They worked tirelessly, pouring their hearts and souls into every detail. It was hard work, but it was also incredibly fulfilling. They were creating something beautiful together, and it brought them even closer. The day they opened the doors to their little cafe was one of the proudest moments of their lives. It was a small, intimate space, filled with warm light, comfortable chairs, and shelves lined with books. The walls were decorated with photos and artwork, each piece telling a story. It was a reflection of them, their love, their journey, and their shared vision. As they stood behind the counter, watching the first customers walk in, she turned to him and said, "We did it." He smiled, his heart full. "We did. And I couldn't be prouder of us." The cafe quickly became a beloved spot in the neighborhood, a place where people came to relax, connect, and feel at home. It was everything they had dreamed of and more. But more than that, it was a testament to their resilience, their determination, and their love for each other. One evening, as they were closing up the cafe, she turned to him and said, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" he asked, locking the door behind them. I think I want to write a book," she said, her voice tentative but hopeful. "About everything we've been through. About love, loss, and second chances." He looked at her, his eyes filled with admiration. "That's an incredible idea. Your story, our story, could inspire so many people." She nodded, her expression serious. "I want to be honest about everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I want people to know that it's okay to struggle, that it's okay to make mistakes. And that it's never too late to start over." He reached for her hand, his heart swelling with pride. "I think that's amazing. And I'll be here to support you every step of the way." She smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You always are. And that's why I know I can do this." Over the next few months, she threw herself into writing, pouring her heart and soul onto the page. It wasn't easy, there were moments of doubt, moments when she wondered if she was doing the right thing. But he was always there, encouraging her, reminding her of how far she had come and how much her story mattered. When she finally finished the manuscript, they celebrated with a quiet dinner at home. As they sat at the table, toasting to her accomplishment, she turned to him and said, "Thank you. For everything. I couldn't have done this without you." He smiled, his heart full. "You're the one who did the hard work. I'm just here to cheer you on." She reached for his hand, her eyes filled with emotion. "You're more than that. You're my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life. And I'm so grateful for you." He squeezed her hand, his eyes shining with tears. "I'm grateful for you too. Every single day." As they sat there, wrapped in the warmth of their love, they knew that they had come full circle. They had been through hell and back, but they had come out stronger on the other side. They had built a life together, a life filled with love, hope, and endless possibility. And as they looked toward the future, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because that's what love was, not just the happy moments, but the hard ones too. It was about showing up, even when it was difficult. It was about choosing each other, every single day. And that was exactly what they planned to do.